Immigrants? Are we really talking about immigrants? Fear versus fact. Welcome back. No pauses, no fluff. But leave it in the comments if you want to discuss. If you feeling the vibe, like and subscribe. Let's go.
Now, people, you are all members of the same race, the human race, which started with black women between 300,000. White folks, you don't like it, but all you are is faded blacks. That's the way it is. Every one of you, if you trace your DNA back far enough, you're going to find that some of your DNA came from Africa, because we all have the same ancestor back there, every single one of us. And those of you who think you don't have are obviously from outer space. Now, that means that every one of us is a 30th to 50th cousin to every other person in this room. So I want you to turn to the person on your left or your right or behind or in front of you, stick out your hand and say, "Hi, cousin." Now, will every person in this room who considers himself or herself a biracial person stand? Don't you stand. Don't you stand. People, we have to get rid of the language of racism. Words are important, people. Words matter. You have to be careful how you use them, and you have to refuse to tolerate these ugly words being used in your
I actually want to make sure that my communities are safe, but as we start to talk about crime and statistics, Mr. Beer, I want to play a little game with you. It's called Rhetoric versus Reality. And so I want to ask you, my first question, is this rhetoric or reality? Immigrants commit more crimes than U.S. citizens.
On a per capita basis?
Rhetoric or reality?
Oh, it is rhetoric.
Okay, thank you so much. Mr. Chair, I'd like to ask for unanimous consent to enter into the record this article, which states that undocumented immigrant offending rate lower than U.S.-born citizen rate, and this is from nij.ojp.gov.
Without objection.
Thank you so much. The next one, immigrants are just living off the federal government and contribute nothing.
That would be rhetoric.
Okay, thank you so much. Mr. Chair, I would ask unanimous consent to enter study that says undocumented immigrants pay almost $100 billion in taxes. This is from the Alabama Reflector.
Without objection.
Thank you so much. My final rhetoric or reality question is immigrants only enter at the southern border.
Rhetoric.
Okay, right, because they enter all kinds of ways. I just wanted to make sure that I put that out there. In fact, I have a few more questions because I still got a little bit of time, which I usually run out of time. We have talked again about crime, and there's been this overemphasis on it. And honestly, I can tell you that I don't want anyone to be killed, whether it's here or anywhere else. There is nothing about me as the child of a preacher that makes me say that I want people to die, okay? So I feel as if my colleagues from across the aisle have decided that they are going to make immigrants the boogeyman. It's insanity to me, but they also are showing compassion for victims, which they should, but they have no compassion for people that are contributing to making us great in this country. So interestingly enough, I'm curious to know, Mr. Beer, if you know if immigrants contributed to these particular crimes. There was a mass shooting in Buffalo, New York that killed a number of African Americans as they were trying to shop for groceries. Was the defendant an immigrant in that case? Do you know?
No, he was a U.S.-born citizen.
Thank you so much. Charleston, South Carolina, there were black churchgoers trying to praise the Lord. They were killed. Was that an immigrant that perpetrated that or not?
No, that was a U.S.-born citizen.
Thank you so much. Now, coming home to Texas, there was an El Paso shooting. Do you know if that was an immigrant or not?
No, they were targeting immigrants in that case.
In fact, each of these cases, it was white supremacists. And so the last unanimous consent that I'd asked for is this article that states that white supremacists behind over 80% of extremism-related U.S. murders in 2022.
Without objection.
Thank you so much.
Why can't American manufacturers make it cheap enough that you don't import it from China? Why is it that John Deere is considering moving manufacturing to Mexico rather than just do it
cheaper labor, I assume?
Well, it's not just cheaper labor. There's technology and there's other things. But so Trump says, well, if we have these tariffs, then those companies will just manufacture here.
Yeah.
But think that through. If you could today manufacture it cheap enough so that you didn't have to import anything, wouldn't you do it?
It was the time of the Great Depression. I guess some politicians got it into their heads that the Mexicanos were responsible for the whole thing. I mean, they were taking up a lot of jobs. Jobs that were needed for what they called real Americans.
I have to get home to my children. Por favor, señor, please.
So La Migra made some big sweeps through the barrio, and they rounded up everyone they could.
I live here. No, I belong here, señor, por favor. Señor.
It didn't matter if you were a citizen like my mother. If you looked Mexicano, you were picked up and shipped out. She had just been out shopping. She wasn't allowed to come home. My father was never told. She was all alone and she was pregnant. All these things really happened. The year was 1933.
We have this immigration problem, and I don't mean the one that Donald Trump defines as a problem or that others define as a problem on the far right who are reactionary, Minutemen at the border. I'm talking about the reason we have a narrative problem around immigration and the reason we have such vitriol aimed at folks coming across the border. But keep in mind, only one border, right? The Minutemen do not camp out in boats off the coast of Nova Scotia, shooting at those crafty Canadians as they sneak into our country to take advantage of our superior health care. They don't do that. It's just down there at that other border, which I beg to remind you is an artificial border created at the outcome of a war, which was a war of aggression started on false pretense by this country. Not what they taught us in 8th grade, but now that is what happened. So really, folks are coming home. Can I get an amen? People are coming home. Right? They're coming home. They're coming home. And their families were here a long time before the vast majority of ours, and yet we tell them that they don't belong. Very interesting. The reason this is even possible, though, is because of the narrative we've told about how we, and now I'm talking about those of us of European descent, because black folks know how they got here. Right? A lot of Asian folk know how they got here. A lot of folks were brought over, particularly Chinese folk, to work the railroads, didn't care how many of them died. Right? Indigenous folks know how they got here. Right? But white folks have told a fiction. Right? White folks' story has basically been this. Our people came for liberty and freedom. We came for principles like that. Those people are just coming for stuff. Right? That's what we say in so many words. We came for principles. They're coming for stuff. Let's clear this up. We did not come for liberty and freedom. And I know this because if we had come for liberty and freedom, we would have established liberty and freedom. And I don't just mean with regard to people of color, I mean each other. Like, white folks spent a lot of time in the colonies just trying to figure out who was the bigger witch, right? Like, we just would kill each other. It wasn't like one big happy white family. It was just, you're not a good enough Christian. No, you're not a good enough Christian. No, you're not a good enough Christian. Now I'm going to drown you because you're a warlock. I mean, that was the kind of, like, in a nutshell, that was the colonial experience. So that was not Schoolhouse Rock, right? Yeah, right? So we didn't establish liberty and freedom even vis-a-vis one another. Let's be honest, we came for stuff. We came for stuff like opportunity, stuff like land, stuff like the ability to survive because things weren't working back home. Like, we need to be honest about, like, our people were the losers of Europe. And I don't mean that, I'm not trying to be judgmental or harsh, I'm just being honest. Like when Donald Trump says Mexico's not sending their best, okay, you think England sent their best? The hell? Y'all like that. Look, the people say, my family came over on the Mayflower. All right, shh. Why are you bragging, Buttercup? That is not... I don't know who was on the Mayflower, but I know who wasn't. The king. The king was not on the Mayflower. Nobody the king wanted to keep around was on the Mayflower. But we have this fictional narrative. It's almost like we believe sometime around 1642, there was a British father somewhere in England that got his family together around the fireplace in the morning and said, all right, here's the thing. I know we're doing pretty well. Like, we got this big castle. We got all this gold. I know it's brilliant, right? It's fantastic. We were at the king's palace last week. Kids, you remember you played with his children out in the garden. Wasn't that great? Yeah, I know, it was amazing, wasn't it? It was great. Listen, that's all fine and good, but Daddy has an idea. My idea is as follows. Keep up, please. Keep up. Gather all your things. Not all of your things. We have a lot of things because we're doing really well. We're rich. We're powerful. Just gather up like a basket full of stuff, and we are going to get on a big boat. And by that, I mean a rickety old ship. Like, I don't even know if it's seaworthy. Like, it might sink. We might drown, get eaten by sharks, get robbed by pirates, get scurvy, die a horrible, miserable death on the open ocean. However, and this is the important part, it will be an adventure. So what do you say? That didn't happen, right? The winners didn't get on the boat. The winners had no reason to leave. And you know what? There's no shame in that. There's no shame at all in having been the losers. In fact, let me tell you something. There's something quite beautiful about the losers saying, we're done with losing and we're going to rebel against that and try to carve out a new life. But you know what? It's every bit as beautiful when folks in Mexico do it, and Guatemala do it, and Sri Lanka do it, and Vietnam do it, and Nigeria do it. And do any of us actually believe that if our family's countries of origin had been contiguous to the United States, that they wouldn't have come undocumented? Like, do we think my great-grandfather, who came as a Jewish immigrant from Russia in the early 1900s, like if Russia had been where Mexico is, do we actually want to believe that he would have said, well, I would love to be able to feed my family and keep them from dying, but there are these laws? No. He would have done what he had to do. So this whole thing about documented and undocumented is this artificial narrative too. First of all, who's documented and who's not is the result of laws passed by people in power. It has nothing to do with inherent morality or ethics. It has to do with power, straight power relationships, and any of our families would have done the same thing to keep our families alive, right? But if we're not willing to critique that narrative, we can't see ourselves in them, and we can't see them in us, or they and we. Once again, wasn't a good student, it's a grammar thing, but either one will work.
And you wonder why there's over 60% of the prison population is black. I'm not saying African American because they're not African American. They're the Aboriginals. They were here.
No such thing.
Because they were the true Native Americans. They're the copper-colored race. Look up Dane Calloway and watch his shows. That man, Dane Calloway on YouTube. Oh my God. I mean, he is fucking beyond brilliant. The research he does, whoo, he goes way deep into this shit. And when you start realizing, it's like, what they, because you'll have people out there saying, oh, well, it didn't happen to me or this or that. It's like, if it did happen to you, we should fucking look at everything and think, you know what? That happened to us. Yeah. Because it doesn't matter what skin color you are, what fucking, I don't care if you have, whatever. If you're a human being, they did it to us.
Cube, why are you putting Native Americans in here? Why isn't this just for black people?
Well, black people are Native Americans. We've had, a lot of proof that, some of us started here in this land. Everybody wasn't brought over from Africa. So, we have to, like you say, unpack all of that and try to, find the true lineage of people in this country.
Most of the so-called Africans or African American people are actually indigenous to this land. They were already here. Columbus didn't find nothing new. There were already people here, and he was in search while he was studying prophecy and scripture, trying to find a holy people that were promised a land that was located to the west, which was essentially us. And when he came on this land, he called us Indians because he thought he landed in India, which it wasn't true, you know. But we're melanated people. Some contain a little bit more melanin than others, you know, but we're still indigenous to this land. This land is ours, you know. So all this reparations and stuff that they want to give, you know, 40 acres and a mule or whatever, that's frivolous. That wouldn't account for anything, you know. That's blasphemy against our people, black and brown. We need our land back, point blank. There's no amount of money that can substantiate the amount of killing and bloodshed that's been done on our people, point blank period. You know, so I don't know, it would be somebody at me asking you, hey, how much do you think you're worth? Are you worth 40 acres and a mule? Oh, nah. I think you're priceless.
There are land papers before slavery in my people's name here. How was it? Because when the Europeans came here, what Roger is talking about, we gave a lot of people some spots to settle. But they took those spots and wanted bigger spots. My people right now, the Shatta, they took on the end from our people, I'm talking about the end of the big take, 25 million acres of land by removing my people from here to Oklahoma. That was the last of their land. 25 million acres of land. And it was people that looked like me. What Andrew Jackson did was he appointed some Europeans. I want you to know how I'm here, brother. My grandfathers were a generation of chiefs. I come from a line of chiefs. I'm from a royal family of chiefs. What the Europeans did was took my people, took the women and the children, and some European that Andrew Jackson was friends with, appointed them as chiefs, left the original chiefs back here, took the white chief that he appointed, which into Oklahoma is, as you know today, as Indian Territory. Indian Territory was set up by mixed breeds, okay?
Yeah.
The people that signed the treaty was either non-native or mixed breed.
African Americans today have an equal probability of being Native American and African or Native American only. You should be aware that mixed race people were not reclassified by accident. It was a component of the U.S. government's larger plan to take Native American resources and territory. The Dawes Act of 1887 was one of the most important laws in this area. By splitting common tribal lands into individual allotments, the Dawes Act, also called the General Allotment Act, sought to integrate Native Americans into European American civilization. Allotments of land were made to Native Americans who were listed on tribal rolls. Those who were not included in this procedure. However, it was frequently purposefully difficult for people of mixed African and Native American origin to claim their Native American background. The government may deny these people the land rights associated with tribal membership by labeling them African Americans instead of Native Americans.
When we talk about that in the abstract, it's easy sometimes for the discussion to take on a feeling of us versus them. And when that happens, a lot of folks forget that most of us used to be them. We forget that. And it's really important for us to remember our history. Unless you're one of the first Americans, a Native American, you came from someplace else. Somebody brought you. The Irish, who left behind a land of famine. The Germans, who fled persecution. The Scandinavians, who arrived eager to pioneer out west. The Polish, the Russians, the Italians, the Chinese, the Japanese, the West Indians, the huddled masses who came through Ellis Island on one coast and Angel Island on the other. Now, all those folks, before they were us, they were them.
A Donald Trump presidency, we will finally evict all of these illegal aliens that are coming here and stealing jobs from Americans. If you break into my house, should I just accept you because you washed my dishes and made my beds? I say no. I say you need to go back and come back in the right way.
So is that what the Indians should have told white Americans?
Absolutely. Ask Cochise if border control is important.
Because the original illegal alien are European white folk in America.
Agreed.
And so should the Indians stand up today and say deport all white folks back to Europe?
Well, should we learn something from their mistake? Because we are here now.
Or should you learn something from their compassion to give other people an opportunity like was given to you and your ancestors? Learn from their compassion. That's what you should learn from.
I say learn from their mistakes. Ask Geronimo if taking care of your borders is important. We need to do that now.
And I agree with Cochise, Geronimo, and Sitting Bull. Letting in the white man was the worst mistake that the Indians ever could have made. I agree with you. That was one of the greatest mistakes. Even right there in South Africa, they got a similar problem.
White people ultimately don't need other races in order to succeed, in order to be ourselves. Absolutely not.
So how do you think America became the greatest economic nation without...
Not through black people.
Oh, it wasn't? It wasn't because of free labor?
Are you talking about slavery?
No, I'm talking about slavery and also what happened after slavery, which Douglas Blackman talked about, slavery by another name. So I'm trying to understand, when you say didn't need it, how do you think America became the greatest economy that it did? How do you think that happened?
Through the genius of Europeans.
How was the genius of Europeans when the fact of the matter is it was actually King Cotton that supplied the economic means for America to do so? And that was a result of free labor from black people.
Look, the whole point here is that who creates these systems, who creates these business models and businesses?
Slavery was a business model?
Well, yes, it was a business model.
I asked you again, okay? You said we don't need anybody else.
No.
But the reality is, America history proves you wrong. The fact of the matter is, there is no great America. You can't sit here and talk about that greatness without other people making that happen.
Well, another day and another story about the people who voted for Donald Trump absolutely terrified that Trump is going to do what he promised to do. Now, yesterday, I talked about the teachers, superintendents who voted for Trump, and then now they're shocked that he is going to cut the Department of Education possibly, or at the very least cut funding to it, and they're worried they're going to lose their jobs. Today, once again, it's the farmers. Now, we have already talked multiple times over the last few months at this point about farmers across the country who voted for Trump, panicking that his mass deportation plans are going to devastate their farms, which would then devastate the food supply here in the United States. This is an issue that will, of course, affect everybody. Doesn't matter your income level. This is kind of a big deal. And now Bloomberg actually went out and talked to several Trump voting farmers down here in the South, and they voted for Trump. They like Trump. We're terrified of what Trump is going to do to our businesses. In an interview with Bloomberg, tomato grower Tony DeMare said that it would be a major mistake for Trump to institute the kind of crackdown on undocumented farm labor that has been enacted in Florida, where he says he's having trouble finding people to pick crops. A lot of people left Florida for Georgia, north, scared. Farmers had to let their crops rot, he told Bloomberg. And that, of course, is before Trump even got sworn in, right? Which is happening, just shortly here, really. So even before Trump's policies that are going to make the problem so much worse, the problem already existed. Farmers are having crops rot in the field. Idaho-based farmer Shay Myers, this one not in the South, obviously, tells Bloomberg that it is simply not realistic, given current conditions, to hire only American citizens or even only documented immigrants who come into the country on H-2A guest worker visas. He also bluntly tells Bloomberg that if he, quote, had to replace every falsely documented worker with an H-2A worker, it wouldn't happen.
House Bill 1484. This is happening right now, and I'm just going to read it to you so that you don't think that I'm misinterpreting anything in this bill. The offense of trespass by an illegal alien under this section is a felony for which the authorized term of imprisonment is life imprisonment without eligibility for probation, parole, conditional release, or release except by any act of the governor or natural death of such person. With me? The department shall develop and maintain an information system that operates at all times and provides various means to receive and maintain reports of violations of this act. The various means of receiving such reports shall include, but are not unlimited to, a toll-free telephone hotline, email address, and online reporting portal. The department shall periodically publicize the hotline phone number, email address, internet website address, and any other means by which the department may receive such reports. If an illegal alien is arrested and imprisoned under this section as a result of a report to the information system, the person who made the report shall be eligible to receive a reward of $1,000 for providing such report. The department shall develop and implement the Mississippi Illegal Alien Certified Bounty Hunter Program, which is hereby created to certify applicants to the program as certified bounty hunters for purposes of finding and detaining illegal aliens in this state under this section. I just want to remind you that prison is the only place where slavery is still legal, and just for the crime of being in this country, you will be imprisoned for the rest of your life as a slave with no chance to ever be released.
America was built on slavery, and it's never moved away from that model. Right now in the United States, there are about 800,000 prisoners who do forced labor. And if they're paid at all, they're paid as little as $1 for an 8-hour shift. They make products for McDonald's, Wendy's, Walmart, Starbucks, as well as furniture for office buildings and military uniforms, all kinds of things. And these prisons make billions of dollars with these contracts. And that makes it a huge incentive to keep American prisons full. And that's why we had things like the war on drugs, which was actually just an excuse to fill prisons with laborers. Immigrants in ICE detention centers also do labor. They have a voluntary work program, but it's not that voluntary. You still only make $1 a day, but then they charge you like $11 for a tube of toothpaste. So since the detention centers don't supply them with basic things that they need, and that they have to buy them from the detention center, they don't really have to pay them that $1. But those detention centers haven't become a big industry like American prisons have. Part of that is just a lack of demand for detention centers. Those detention centers just don't have a big enough labor force. But it feels like we could be in the beginning of building a new industry.
Most of us learned a distorted history of slavery in school. So as white Americans, most of us don't realize our connection to it. Here's a quick rundown of historical facts I had not been taught. That the North was deeply implicated, that slavery was legal in northern states for over 200 years, that Northerners up and down the economic spectrum made their livings in businesses tied to slave trade and slavery, that Northern mills processed cotton harvested by enslaved people. The Midwest and the West were implicated. They grew food to feed the South, where land was devoted to cash crops like cotton, harvested by the enslaved. Consumers throughout the country were implicated in their everyday purchases of clothing, coffee, sugar, rice, tobacco. People who immigrated from Europe after slavery were implicated. I have Irish, French, and German immigrant ancestors who came to the United States in the 19th century, worked in factories, struggled, but they were given access to the American dream. Why were waves of immigrants flocking here? Because it was the land of opportunity. Why was the economy booming? Why were there jobs? Because it had been built largely on unpaid labor.
Is America stolen land, like many people say? Watch this clip and see what you think.
No matter what your legends say, you didn't sprout from the plains like the spring grasses, and you didn't coalesce out of the ether. You came out of the Minnesota woodlands armed to the teeth and set upon your fellow man. You massacred the Kiowa, the Omaha, the Ponca, the Oto, and the Pawnee without mercy. And yet you claim the Black Hills as a private preserve bequeathed to you by the Great Spirit.
And who gave us the guns and powder to kill our enemies? And who traded weapons to the Chippewa and others who drove us from our home?
Chief Sitting Bull, the proposition that you were a peaceable people before the appearance of the white man is the most fanciful legend of all. You were killing each other for hundreds of moons before the first white stepped foot on this continent. You conquered those tribes, lusting for their game and their lands, just as we have now conquered you for no less noble a cause.
This is your story of my people.
This is the truth, not legend.
The Vatican hides a lot of things because the same buildings that are at the Vatican are the same buildings that were in San Francisco. And before the World Fair of San Francisco, they got rid of all the buildings that look like the Vatican. That was that whole reset. And what's interesting is there's a book from 1907 that talks about how when the San Francisco World Fair whole thing took place, that they tried to put out the fires with TNT and dynamite. TNT and dynamite to put out fires. Never heard of that before. Anytime there's a fire, I've never heard of anybody using TNT and dynamite. I've also never heard of them using cannons. They also talked about how they used cannons against the fire. So the same buildings that are in San Francisco are the same buildings that are in the Vatican. They're just going to try to point your eyes at the Vatican and say that they own that land, when in reality, those buildings and that type of style of architecture was all over the world. They just capitalized on it. And what's funny is the fires only burnt the tops of the buildings and certain parts of the building, but other parts of the building were completely untouched. Reminds me of a lot of 1893 Chicago, 1901 St. Louis, in 1901 Buffalo, New York. Only certain things burn and only certain things crumble.
Ask yourself a question, is this even possible? Is it possible that X building was built in the 1890s? They're giving us timeline to like a year. It was built in a year. They want us to believe we didn't have the technology, that we were low tech, and yet we're building all of these amazing structures. This disparity between what the narrative says and what's actually there.
You have places, cities in America that look as though they were constructed in medieval Europe, when nothing was here and people showed up and just got started building, from what we're told. One would assume that they would build with the means that were available to them. Wood, nails if they were lucky. What we get is this narrative that people were showing up and really making do with what they had.
What we learn about in school is there was nothing here. This land was free for the taking. The only inhabitants were wild Indians, and we built everything here. Everything you see in this country, in North America, because we're talking about Canada too, was built by us. After we got here, nothing here. But they had to change the narrative. They had to destroy the evidence.
Authority to go into churches and go into schools.
We empowered law enforcement to enforce
but
the
that
law
also
everywhere
has
to protect Americans.
Effect, a chilling effect, arguably, to people to not send their kids to school.
I desperately hope it has a chilling effect on illegal immigrants
you think the
coming
U.S.
into our
Conference
country.
of Catholic Bishops are actively hiding criminals from
I think the U.S.
law
Conference of Catholic Bishops has frankly not been a good partner in common sense immigration enforcement that the American people voted for. And I hope, again, as a devout Catholic, that they'll do better.
Yes or no? Is Trump's name ever mentioned in Project 2025? Yes or no? Just yes or no. I got you.
Within the document itself,
yes.
There are a number of references to the former administration.
So is Trump's name mentioned just one time?
I believe it's mentioned more.
Okay. 5 times.
I haven't counted.
Oh, okay. Well, if I told you that his name is mentioned approximately 312 times, would you have any reason to dispute that?
I don't have any reason.
Okay, thank you very much. So it's interesting that we want to try to pretend. We're not going to pretend in here. We're going to work with facts.
Okay, I'm going to explain this because some of y'all seem confused. See this lady in the blue? That is an American Indian. This lady in the red? That is a Native American, an immigrant from Siberia. Once again, lady in the brown, that is an American Indian. Lady over here with the feather, that is a Native American, Siberian immigrant. This is an American Indian with the headband. This over here in the red is a Native American, an immigrant from Siberia. Once again, lady in the brown, an American Indian, the indigenous people of America. Lady in the black jacket, Native American, immigrant from Siberia. These are 2 different people, 2 different cultures. Don't confuse them.
All the people I spoke with understand that every American president deports people. They mentioned President Obama. What Trump is doing is creating a panic, and he is being malicious and cruel in a way that I don't think we've seen any American president in my lifetime be, right? It's not about getting them out. It's about terrorizing them. And it's working, right? The other piece of this that is complicating is that the claims that these migrants are criminals, that they're sort of bloodthirsty or they're, bad actors, is not being met with any counterpoint. right? It is literally up to the media and me, not just me, but to offer a counterpoint, to show who these people are.
Why? Where are the Democrats?
Because I think they feel very cowed by the 2024 election. They don't feel like, look at the Laken Riley act as an indicator for Democrats feeling like they need to play ball on this, which, listen, from a strategy standpoint, I'm not in Congress, but I do know that the mischaracterization of this group of people has, independent of the ethical and moral consequences of what we're doing to them, has real economic consequences. It's not just that they work in bars and restaurants, they work in construction sites, they work throughout the American economy. They also patronize parts of the American economy. You go to Newark, and it's like a ghost town in the area where they had the raid, because people are terrified to go out on the streets. These are small businesses that are getting affected. I mean, these folks are part of our country. They are part of the fabric of our society. Denying their humanity will have a bounce back effect on us, and not just our consciences, on our bottom line. And I think that, Democrats need to find the gumption to draw attention to the reality of things, because they are in the shadows as far as this debate is concerned.
Migrants shackled and in chains boarding a deportation flight. The Trump administration has released this footage touting the president's crackdown on illegal migration. These flights returning undocumented migrants from the US were happening even before Donald Trump returned to the White House. 1.5 million people were deported under Joe Biden, many of them similarly on planes and in chains. One key difference is that Donald Trump is now using military planes for deportations. I spoke to some Brazilians who were deported on one of those planes. They told me that being in handcuffs caused panic because there were technical faults with the plane. The plane was incredibly hot and it was difficult to use the bathroom. The ones that I spoke to said that they had been detained months ago under Joe Biden's administration when they tried to cross into the US across the Mexico border. These images show migrants, most of them men, on a jet with armed members of the military. From Trump's perspective, this is meant to be a show of strength, a sign that he's willing to use all types of government resources to fulfill his promises. But they've been controversial in South America.
Most Americans don't know that the United States practically stole Texas from Mexico. You see, Texas, along with these whole areas stretching up to California, used to belong to Mexico. In the mid-1800s, as the United States was busy expanding its territory westward, they started bumping into the recently independent country of Mexico, which at the time wanted a way for their country to become more economically productive. So they started renting out huge plots of land to American settlers in this region you might have heard of, called Texas. As Americans settled the land, they brought slaves with them, which were totally illegal in Mexico at the time. As the Mexican government tried to crack down on these settlers for breaking the law, these people responded by fighting a war with the Mexican government, which they won, and then declared themselves as their own independent country as the Republic of Texas. The Republic of Texas existed as an independent nation from 1836 to 1845. Mexico acknowledged Texas's independence, but the U.S. government disputed where the location of this border was. So in 1845, the U.S. Congress passed a joint resolution for annexing Texas, offering Texas the option to join the United States, and Texas accepted the offer in July 1845 and voted in favor of the annexation, officially becoming the 28th state of the United States.
Fear versus fact. If you made it to the end, tell a friend so we can run these numbers up. And I know the subject controversial right now, so if you got something to add, hit the comment tag. Good or bad. Like when I was a kid, it used to be a saying. Sometimes it's not what you do, it's how you do it. And I'm going to leave y'all with this one. Did y'all even know that Obama nickname leaving office was Deporter in Chief? Deporter in Chief. Check it out. Peace.